Hey guys, Sarah here. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about every job I've ever had. I wrote them all down so I wouldn't forget them, and I think we're at 17. So if you're interested in hearing about all of the random jobs I've ever had, keep watching. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe before you leave so you don't miss any of my future videos. I share tons of fashion, beauty, and lifestyle. This is actually my very first storytime video, so I would love it if you subscribed, and let's get into it. Okay, I have two jobs that are like kind of jobs, kind of not jobs. So the very first story I guess I have for you is when I was young, like maybe 10, I decided I wanted to start my own business. And so I got together with the little girl down the street and I printed out little business cards. It was like a template that it was perforated, and so you could just punch them out. And I started a like not lawn, but like garden weeding business. I charged $2 an hour, and I just would drop my business card off at all of the neighbors' houses. Also, sorry if you can hear my neighbors. I think they're vacuuming out their car next door. Anyway, so I dropped off my business card at all of the neighbors' houses to see who wanted me to weed their yard or their gardens for $2 an hour. I ended up weeding the people's house, my parents' next door neighbors, and I sent them an invoice, like the whole deal. I thought I was so professional, and I ended up making like $70 from them, which, I mean, as like a 10-year-old is hilarious, but I think they were also in shock when they got, one, a professional invoice from like this kid next door, and two, that I had spent so much time in their garden weeding. So that was my very first business venture. And then when I was in middle school, one of my best friends, Claire, I've talked about her before. I was actually supposed to be in Lake Tahoe next week with her and her husband, and Adam, obviously. Anyway, I've known her since kindergarten, and when we were in middle school, her dad was the athletic director at our school, and my mom was in charge of concessions. And so at all of the sporting games, we would work the concession stand and then also work the clocks. So we would run the clocks for all the sporting events, and we got paid to do that. And we used all of that money basically on going snowboarding. So we had like, Michigan's very flat. We had like a ski hill that was very close to where we grew up, and we would spend Friday nights snowboarding. And then when I turned 14, that was the earliest that you could work in Michigan. I got my work permit and I got a job at Big Boy, which, depending on where you are in the country, some places it's called Bob's Big Boy, some places it's something else, but here it's just called Big Boy, and it's just like a chain restaurant. And I was the salad bar girl, and I worked weekends. I had to set up like the whole breakfast bar, so I would start working at like 6 a.m. and it was terrible. Like, absolutely terrible. It was by far like the lowest on the totem pole you could get. I wasn't even a hostess. I wasn't even able to like seat people at this basically diner restaurant. So yeah, I just filled the salad bar, like would fill up dressing and soup and make sure everything was good. And I also would have to like clean the floor and bus tables and yeah, just do all of those things. And it was so early in the morning, especially because I was already getting up for school every day. So the weekends came around and I wanted to like sleep in and was not able to. So I ended up quitting that job and I got a job at Jet's Pizza. So that was my second like real job that I was actually getting a paycheck from a company. And I worked at Jet's for probably like a year. I answered phones, took orders, folded boxes, made pizzas, made the sauces, cut up all the veggies and toppings, and I did basically everything there. And it was actually a pretty fun job. I got my friend Claire a job there while I worked there. My boss told me that if I could get one of my friends to work there, he would give me a raise. And so I got my friend Claire a job there, and then he gave me a 25-cent raise, which at that point I was only working, I think I worked from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. like a couple days a week. And so that would only be $1 per shift extra, which is like, oh my gosh, it was so bad. And I was making minimum wage. I think it was like $5.15 or $5.25, and then I got bumped up to I think $5.50, and then he hired this other girl, and I found out she was making like $2 more per hour than I was. And so I asked my boss about it, and he told me it's because her butt was nicer than mine. So, which, thinking back, that would never be a thing today. Like, if somebody said that, that would be like a lawsuit in the making in today's world. But back then, that was just life. I was working at Jets when I finally had enough money to buy my first car, and I bought a '99 Ford Escort. That was my very first car, and I was so excited to be able to like finally drive and have my own car. I could not wait to get a job. I've always wanted to work. I've always loved to work. And so I was so excited when I turned 14 and was able to get a job in the first place. So then having enough money to buy my car was just unbelievably exciting. So I decided, since I was 16, I was ready to make more money, and I got a job at a Leo's Coney Island, which, if you are not in Michigan, Coney Islands are basically a category of restaurants, and it's like fast-paced restaurants that the turnover of tables is like 20 minutes, and they serve Coney dogs, which are just the hot dogs with chili mustard and onion. They were opening a new one that was close to where I lived, and so I applied for the job, got it, and then I had to train at a different one until that location opened. And then it opened. I was a waitress, and if you're a waitress, you make at the time I made $2.65 an hour, and then I got tips, which ended up being way more than the like $5.50 that I was making at Jets. So I started waitressing. The restaurant opened, and we had a line out the door every single night, and I was making like $100, sometimes like $200 per night as a 16-year-old, like way back when. And I lived with my parents, obviously I had no bills. And so I would always have like my acrylic nails, I'd always go tanning, I'd always go snowboarding, I'd go shopping, like all the things that were cool in like 2001. Whatever I wanted to spend money on, I could spend money on. And I had enough money to put gas in my car, pay for like whatever I wanted to pay for. It was incredible. So I would work a few nights a week there, and then I would work on the weekends. The morning shift was where it was at. And so we made such good money. And I met some of my like best friends in high school there. None of them went to my school, but we just became the closest friends. It was like hanging out with our friends all shift. I'll try and find, I think I have some photos in my basement, so I'll try and find them and insert them for you guys. But that was one of my most favorite jobs ever. I worked there until I went off to college. So it was just such a fun experience. I had so much more money than I needed at that time in my life, and it just gave me the freedom to do what I wanted at that point. Okay, I can't really remember the timing of this. I know I was still working at Leo's, but then I got a job at JCPenney Portrait Studio. I don't remember why. Like, I don't know. So I ended up getting a job there, and I worked there for like maybe 6 months. I didn't work super often, and I have no idea why I decided to get a job there, but I did. And then my senior year of high school, I decided to do an internship. So at my school, you could do a program. We had 6 periods, and you could take off the last 2 periods if you got a job that pertained to something you wanted to do with your career. And so I decided I wanted to study fashion. And so I got a job at Hollister. I convinced my school counselor that it fit what I wanted to do in the fashion industry. And so I got to leave school 2 hours early in exchange for working 10 hours a week at Hollister. So I got a job at Hollister at the mall. So I was just doing the usual like folding clothes and doing the cash wrap and all of that. That job was not fun. It was incredibly boring. I was so used to Leo's, which I was still working there, and then I would go to Hollister and just like stand around, and Leo's is fast paced. Like I said, the tables turned around like every 20 minutes. So you would just run around the entire shift, and then I'd go to Hollister and just stand in one spot and like greet people. It was terrible. And I also didn't make as much money there as I made waiting tables. So I hated that. And then I went to my first year of college, and I decided I did not want to go there anymore. And so I transferred and moved back in with my parents, and I went to a community college to finish up my prereqs so that I could move to LA. If you guys want me to tell the whole story of like college, I went to FITM in LA. If you guys want me to tell the story of like my college experience, I went to college here for 2 years, and then I went to the Fashion Institute in LA. I actually went there when they were filming The Hills, and just my whole experience of like living in LA, moving out there, moving across the country by myself. I will do another video like this. This is obviously my first story time, so if you guys are interested in that, I can film that video too. Let me know down below. Also, let me know in the comments what your first job was, or how many jobs you've had, or what your favorite job was. I would love to know if you guys have done any of the same jobs that I've had, or if you have had like similar horror stories of jobs or anything like that. All right, so I moved home. I was, I guess, 19 at the time. I got my job back at Leo's and I worked there briefly, and I live in, or like I grew up in Metro Detroit, and it's right across the border from Canada. And so in Canada, you only have to be 19 to drink. And so me and all of my really good girlfriends from Leo's would go to Canada and go to bars, and we thought we were the coolest. And then I got a job as a telemarketer. Okay, this is by far the worst job that I've ever had. So I only lasted there, I think, like 3 months. It was a little office. I had a shoebox of an office with no windows, and they told me that if I worked my way up in the company, I'd be able to have a window in my office. Like, goals. My job was to set up meetings. So we had salespeople that would go to a different city every week. So at the beginning of the week, we would be told what city we were selling for, and then we would call all of these hotels in that city and try and set up meetings for our salespeople for the following week. And they were selling, apparently there was like a portion of the budget for hotels that they don't know about or something like that, or they don't know that they can use it for marketing brochures and nobody uses it, so they could essentially get it for free. Pretty sure the entire thing was a scam, and I only lasted a few months there. So I just sat in my tiny office for 8 hours every single day, and the people would just be so rude, asking like, how come you're not in college? Shouldn't you do something with your life? Just like the meanest comments. And little did they know I was in college at the time. So yeah, lasted for a very short time there. And then one of my good friends got me a job at Flagstar Bank, and I worked as a bank teller for just over a year. And I knew at that point that I wanted to move to LA. So I had my whole plan. I had already been accepted into the school. I just needed to finish my prereqs, and I was working on all of those classes at the time. And so I would go to work all day. I worked from like 8:30 to 5, and then I would go straight to night classes, and I took accelerated night classes. So a lot of times the classes would be for 4 hours per night, but only 1 day a week. So I could take like 4 classes per week and just go to school Monday through Friday, or Monday through Thursday at night. And then sometimes I'd take a Saturday class. So that is the last job I had before I moved to LA, was Flagstar. And that was actually a fun job. I met one of my very best friends who we've kind of lost touch, but I met her. I stood up in her wedding, and I like barely knew her at the time, but one of her bridesmaids dropped out, so she last minute asked me to stand up, and then we became such good friends. There were only 5 of us that worked at the branch, and so all of us went to her wedding. Me and one of the other girls were both bridesmaids, and then there was her and then our 2 managers. And so we all went to the wedding, and then the next day, it had to have been on a Friday, because the next day I had to open the bank, and I was so hungover, which I also was I was 20. So yeah, I went to work, I brought my makeup bag and had it on my desk, wet hair, like I was a disaster at work. Yeah, so, and then I worked there, like I said, for just over a year, and then I quit so that I could move to LA. When I was 20, I moved across the country to LA, and I got a job at American Eagle on the 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica. and I worked at that store for probably about 6 months. I was going to the Fashion Institute, and they really tried to not even pressure us, but they really wanted everyone to be working in the industry, whether that was in retail or an unpaid internship, because they said that if you don't work in the industry, it's going to be really hard to get a job afterwards, after you graduated. But I just was not making enough money there. Rent is expensive, I had bills to pay, and so I ended up getting a job. And at the time I was living in Marina del Rey, but that was short-lived. It's a story for another day. And so I ended up moving to Pasadena, and I got a job at the Yard House there. It was my first serving job that I was serving alcohol, and I only lived like 4 blocks from there, and so I could walk to work, and I got a job there, and I made so much more money. So in LA, and I'm sure it's like this in other states as well, but you have to make actual minimum wage. And so I went from making $2.65 an hour serving here to making like $8 an hour there, plus all of my tips. So I was making significantly more money and actually was able to pay my bills and live a normal life. So I worked at Yard House all the way through college, and then when I graduated, it was 2008. And the economy had crashed, so I could not get a job anywhere. The entire fashion industry was laying people off. Nobody was hiring, so it was nearly impossible for me to get a job. So I continued working at Yard House, which that was one of the most fun jobs that I've ever had. I met so many of my best friends in LA working there. It was again just working with all of my friends. It was like socializing. We would all go out after work. We all hung out on the weekends. They were just absolutely my best friends. I'm still in touch with quite a few of them. And actually, one of the girls that I met there is officiating our wedding. So yeah, Yard House was such a good experience. They actually just opened the first one in Michigan last year, and it's so nostalgic for me to go there. I continued to work at Yard House, and then I ended up getting a job at Macy's as a visual merchandiser, but I got it at the location in Mission Viejo, which if you live in California and you're thinking you lived in Pasadena, you worked at Yard House in Pasadena, and then you got a job in Mission Viejo, you're probably thinking I'm crazy, and you would be right. So Pasadena is in LA County. Mission Viejo is one of the most southern cities in Orange County. It was about 62 miles, I think, from my apartment each way, and that's also LA traffic. And it was a huge pay cut, so I couldn't afford to quit my job at Yard House. So I worked from 6 to 3, Monday through Friday at Macy's as a visual merchandiser, so I had to get up so early. I actually would take my half-hour lunch break and nap in my car because I was so tired all the time. And then I would get off work at 3, I would drive back up to LA, change, get ready for work at Yard House, work until about 1 in the morning, go back to sleep, do it all over again. I worked Monday through Friday at Macy's, and then I worked, usually I had Mondays off at Yard House. I would work Tuesday through Saturday at Yard House, and then I would have Sunday off completely, and I would literally sleep the entire day. Like, my friends would always try and hang out with me, and I would make plans with people, and then I would fall asleep and just miss every plan that I ever made. So my life was completely consumed with working these 2 jobs, just trying to survive. Also, at that point, I was trying to still get a job that was more what I wanted to do in the fashion industry, and I ended up landing a job at BCBG. So I quit working at Macy's, and I think I was there for like 9 months. It wasn't super long, but it was so hard on me. So I ended up getting a job at BCBG, which is in Vernon, and it was actually not that far away from my house. And at that point, I had moved to Glendale, which I love Pasadena and Glendale. If you're from the area, it's just one of my favorite little areas. Anyway, I got a job at BCBG Corporate, and oh my gosh, it was terrible. Like, I hated it from the second I started it, and I had to quit Yard House because the hours just didn't work, and the traffic trying to get to that specific area was just too much, and I was making more than I was at Macy's, so it was like enough for me to scrape by. So I worked full-time obviously at BCBG, and the way that it was, you had to drive to a little parking lot and then take a shuttle to the building. And so depending on if the shuttle would get there or not, you would be standing in the parking lot for like 15-20 minutes, and we were hourly and you could not be late. Like, it was not acceptable to be late. And so anytime I would pull into the parking lot and you saw the shuttle driving away, you'd be like, no, come back, I'm gonna be late. Like, it was just, it was terrible. So yeah, I worked there for about a year, and that was a really, really rough year. I hated my job. My boss was so hard on me. And I remember when I quit, she was so sad. Like, it was the first time that I ever knew she actually valued me as an employee, but I just couldn't hang. Like, they tried to give me a promotion to go from an assistant to an associate and put me on salary, which only meant that I would have to stay there later and get paid less per hour because your hours are much longer. So it was just, everything about that job was absolutely terrible. I made some really good girlfriends there. Like, the girls were top notch that I worked with, and I loved that. Like, lunchtime was basically the only time that was acceptable there. But yeah, I did not stay there for that long. And BCBG is actually the last job that I had in LA. I ended up quitting and deciding that I wanted to move back to Michigan, and then I freaked out, figured I wanted to stay in LA, and I started interviewing for jobs, and I got a couple of offers, but ended up deciding just to come back to Michigan and figure things out. I moved back to Michigan in 2011, and I was just searching for like any job anywhere, and I stumbled across a listing for a marketing director position at a wedding video startup, and I didn't know anything about any of that. I didn't know about the startup world. I was certainly not qualified to be the marketing director, but fake it till you make it. I got hired. It was just me and the co-founder. He was the only person at the company at the time, and so I was his first hire, and him and I got along so well. We became fast friends, and it was so fun being in that culture. We worked in a co-working space with a bunch of other startups, so everyone was like really, really hustling, and the whole experience was really, really fun. I made terrible money, and at that time I was still living with my parents because I had just moved back home, and I didn't know like what area I would want to live in yet, and so I was commuting to Detroit. It was like an hour each way, which was terrible, but it was, I don't know, it was so much fun. And the company started to go under, and he just wasn't really interested in running the company anymore. And so I got laid off, and about a month later, I think, I was in talks with the investors, and they asked me if I would come back to shut the company down. And so I negotiated with them, and I went back simply to like talk to angry brides and cancel for them and like shut the company down. Just kind of like tie up all of the loose ends that needed to be tied up. As I was there, just kind of shutting things down, I was messing with things on social media, and we got repinned by a couple of like big hitters. And Pinterest at that point, it was like 2012. It was like the height of Pinterest. It's like first peak of popularity for weddings, and yeah, we had a couple of viral pins, and then we started getting sales, and I was like, okay, what do we do? I'm trying to be shutting this company down. Should I be accepting sales? Should I not? So I talked to the investors, and they were like, if this continues on, if you want the company, it's yours. So I was like, okay. And the sales kept flowing in faster and faster and faster, and I ended up taking over the company. If I could give you any career advice ever, it's learn as much as you possibly can. If you can learn how to do your boss's job, you are in good shape. So I had learned how to do my boss's job. So he didn't even have to train me to take over the business. I knew everything already. So I knew the ins and outs and how everything was run. And so I easily stepped into that position. So when sales started coming in, I already knew how to do everything. And then I was able to start kind of changing things. And so as sales came in, I was so overwhelmed. I had like over 1,000 unread emails, questions. I was working 24/7, just It was at a point that I would be sitting at my desk, and if someone would come up to even say hi, I would be like, go away, I don't have time to talk, because I would just be like typing, like trying to respond to emails as quickly as possible. It was insane. And I desperately needed to hire somebody, and I didn't even have time to think about hiring or how to find somebody to hire. And so somebody who worked at one of the investment companies, he said that his wife was pregnant and she wanted to go to nursing school, but she was looking for something part-time to work on now. And so I hired her right away. And she came on and she was like, okay, what do you want me to do? And I was like, I don't even know. I don't have time to figure out how to tell you what to do. And so she was the first person who I was ever their boss. And she was just like the sweetest person ever. And she really was able to like pick up and like help me just get somewhat organized, which was so nice. So I ran that company for about 5 years, and we went from working in this co-working space, having 2 desks, to building out our own custom office in a different building and just having our own suite. I had a network of video editors, I had a team, and it was just, oh my gosh, it's so funny thinking about it because I have never learned so much at a job as I learned at that job. I had no idea what I was doing. I was not qualified to run a business. I wasn't qualified to be the marketing director. And then within a year, I all of a sudden was a CEO and I had no idea what I was doing, but I learned a ton. My investment company ended up going under, and so I decided to sell because I had already been looking for an out. I wanted to just get out of the wedding industry. I was so burned out of brides. I was so burned out of people's fiancés getting on the phone yelling at me, asking me if I'm running this operation from my garage, or telling me, oh, you must not be married yet because you have no heart, and just the most awful, terrible things. So I was really, really over the wedding industry, which actually kind of makes me feel like that's why I'm not really interested in having a big wedding. Like, I've always wanted to just have a very small beach wedding because weddings are so emotionally charged, and I think I just never wanted to be involved in that. I have zero energy for drama at all. And then before I sold that company, one of my employees became one of my very best friends, and her and I decided to buy the blog DIY Bride. We saw that it was for sale, and her and I had wanted to do a business together, and so we decided to buy it, and we ran that blog for about 1.5 years, I think, and then we ended up selling the blog because neither of us were passionate about it. I think we both had just realized that we did not want to be in the wedding industry in any capacity. Like, we were so over it, so we sold that company. But also, while I was at the wedding video company, so I had DIY Bride, and then I also had already started my YouTube channel and my blog, which my blog doesn't really, it exists, but I don't post on it anymore. But I started those as a creative outlet from running the wedding video business. So at one point while doing that, I was the CEO of the wedding video company. I was running a wedding blog with my friend, and then I was also running my blog, which I was posting on 5 days a week, and starting my YouTube channel. After I sold the wedding video company, I started being really serious about my blog, and then I was doing consulting for people with just their brands, whatever they needed, social media. I worked with this boutique in Texas, and the woman ended up stiffing me on over $1,000. She just didn't pay me because she got mad at me and decided to fire me, which was like super, super psycho. I worked with a couple of random fashion brands. I worked with a company, they went on to Shark Tank, and so I worked with them briefly trying to get them ramped up for the premiere of their episode. I worked with a couple of products of just helping people with their website and their colors, their social media presence, their branding, just a plethora of different companies and a bunch of different things. I started with Love Sarah at some point in there, and then I got really serious about YouTube. I realized that I didn't like writing blog posts. I just wasn't interested in it, and so I decided to be really, really focused on YouTube. So I was kind of doing all of those things at the same time and trying to ramp all of them up. And so my goal was to ramp up YouTube and my jewelry business so that I could cut consulting down and not work for anyone else and just work for myself. And so ever since, let's see, October, I think, of 2018, I have only done With Love Sarah and then YouTube. So those are all of my jobs. That was so many, and I've been talking for over an hour, so I know this video is gonna be a million years long. I hope that you guys enjoyed hearing all of the random stories from all of my random jobs. Leave me a comment below. Let me know about your jobs, what your favorite was, what your least favorite was. If you have any funny stories about any of your jobs. I feel like all of us have worked like so many random jobs. When you're younger, you just take anything that you can get. So yeah, I would love to hear any of your job stories below. Give this video a thumbs up. Also, let me know if you want me to do more story time videos. I know that's kind of what I'm interested in watching right now, which is what made me want to do this one. I saw Raw Beauty Christy post hers and I was just like, I need to do that video because I've had so many jobs and I'm wanting to hear stories right now and feel like I'm connecting with people. So if you guys are interested in me doing more stories, either give me an idea for a story or like any questions or anything that you would want me to tell a story about, or just that you want me to do them, and I'll try and come up with some ideas. So give this video a thumbs up. If you're still watching, thank you. You guys are the best. I'm sending you virtual hugs, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.